Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening a set of reports that are, well, they're so profound, so absolutely devastating in their detail. They really redefine what it means to study a global catastrophe.
It's a heavy one.
It is. We're moving beyond any kind of theory or, projection. We are going directly into the final consolidated field reports
Yeah.
and the psychological assessments that detail this. This incredibly rapid unfolding global crisis.
A crisis known internally to the bodies trying to manage it as the second flood.
And our mission for this deep dive is to immerse you and ourselves completely in this documentation. We want to navigate the complete timeline, the whole utterly non-conventional nature of this existential threat.
A threat that, as you'll see, just defied biology, physics, and really human comprehension itself. I'm talking about the phenomenon of human liquefaction.
So, to be clear for everyone listening, our sources for this are exclusive and specific. We're using only the Global Monitoring Report, or GMR, the findings from the Global Health Security Council, the GHSC, and the analyses from the Joint Crisis Management Commission, the JCMC.
These were the organizations on the front line. This is their final record.
And when we say deep dive, we truly mean exhaustive detail. This is not going to be a summary of death tolls or, a quick overview.
No.
It's a structured, chronological study of this escalating scientific chaos. We're going to look at the sociological collapse, the official denial, and then the futile deployment of these massive conventional defense strategies.
And ultimately, the documented final extinction of the non-liquefied human population. We are following the material step by step, detailing precisely how existence ceased and what was left behind.
And the narrative itself, as recorded by these organizations, it forces us into some very uncomfortable territory. It blends what we think of as hard science, or maybe more accurately, the total failure of hard science.
That's a better way to put it, yeah.
With these stark sociological observations on class, and it even touches on theology. Specifically with this haunting final anomaly of the individual known as Noah, which effectively closes the human record.
So that's the scope. It's a narrative of total collapse, moving from confusion to denial, and then to a defense that was doomed from the start.
Okay, so let's anchor ourselves at the very beginning. The date the sources are so precise about, October 12th, 20XX. This is the moment the first phase of the second flood officially began.
And the initial setting is, it's Geneva, Switzerland, which is, the very nexus of international health and security coordination.
The heart of global order.
Exactly. And the Global Health Security Council, the GHSC, finds itself immediately issuing an urgent, high-level alert about a phenomenon so scientifically novel, so horrifying, that they could only tentatively label it human liquefaction.
I mean, what a term.
They were reporting on something that had absolutely no biological precedent. Nothing in the textbooks could prepare them for this.
And the discovery of this initial case, the first confirmed moment the world really tipped into this catastrophe, it's just thick with cosmic irony.
It really is.
It wasn't found by some expensive satellite or a government-funded lab. It came through a stroke of what the report calls unbelievable, terrible luck.
It did. The documents are meticulous about the observer. They describe him as a poor but honest philosopher. Now, what was this philosopher doing? He was using astronomical equipment.
So he was literally a man looking into the distant cosmos for answers.
Looking to the heavens for truth, exactly. And in that moment, for some reason, he was redirected to observe this terrestrial horror unfolding right beneath his lens.
The report says he fortuitously redirected his lens toward terrestrial observation.
That simple happenstance turn of focus led to the confirmation of the very first documented case. It just underscores how completely unprepared the formal surveillance structures were. The initial evidence came from a civilian whose gaze was, for a moment, misplaced on Earth.
So who was it? Who was the unfortunate subject, the first human being documented to dissolve into the second flood?
The victim was identified as a lone worker. The report deliberately, and I think importantly, notes that he was returning from a night shift. So this places the event squarely in those early, quiet hours of the morning, perhaps minimizing initial public panic, but it also confirms this immediate vulnerability of those working at the margins of society.
Let's focus on the physical process itself, because the document emphasizes this wasn't decay, it wasn't an injury. It was immediate systemic transformation. How did the liquefaction physically manifest?
The transformation was described as both rapid and definitive. The worker first blurred. That's the word they used.
Blurred? What does that even mean? Like losing focus?
It suggests a destabilization of physical form, I think. as if his outline, his very coherence in space, began to fail before the actual melting process began.
So a breakdown at a molecular level maybe before the macroscopic one.
It seems that way. And then the melting process began, specifically starting from his feet and progressing upward. It was a complete systemic dissolution of the biological structure. The entire human form dissolved. Seemingly without any external trauma, it just collapsed into a fluid mass.
And the relics left behind. I think this is what paints the most vivid picture of this non-standard flood. What was the physical residue? What was left of the first liquefied human?
Only the worker's clothing remained.
Wow.
And the list in the report is so specific, it's chilling. It lists his cap, his shoes, and his clothes. These items were just left there, surrounding the mass of newly formed liquid.
So you have to imagine that silent scene, the empty uniform, just perfectly defined by its own lack of human support, surrounding a pool of what the report later calls sentient, fleshy liquid.
It's the visual signature of the second flood's genesis. It's the framework of a human life, but the biology is just gone.
So this lone philosopher who's just observed the collapse of a human life into a pool of sentient liquid, he doesn't wait for a scientific consensus, does he? He immediately links this event to something ancient, something terrifying.
No, he doesn't wait. He immediately declared, and this is a direct quote from the report, the coming of a great flood.
And what's really noteworthy is the immediate reaction to this. I mean, you'd expect a claim like that from a philosopher to be dismissed as, esoteric or just mad.
Absolutely. But the documents note that this pronouncement was very quickly taken with the utmost seriousness.
And the reason for that, for this immediate adoption of this almost apocalyptic narrative, was the simultaneous global reality check that was happening.
Exactly. The shift in seriousness was driven by the flood of reports coming in from all over the world. Mass liquefactions were being reported worldwide, confirming that this was a synchronous planetary event.
It wasn't just an isolated incident that one man happened to see through a misplaced telescope.
Not at all. The philosopher had simply seen the very first ripple of what was already a global tide.
So once the GHSC confirmed the global nature of this thing, they had to define it. They had to try and draw some kind of scientific box around the impossible.
And they did. They established the official definition for the record, which is worth stating in full. It was complete dissolution of the human body, specifically affecting biological tissues, into a mass of sentient, fleshy liquid.
That word, sentient, that is absolutely vital here.
It is. It tells us that the resulting substance wasn't just inert, sewage or water. It retained some measure of organization, some awareness, or perhaps even malice, and that sentience would be absolutely central to the terror that followed.
This brings us to a crucial and a deeply uncomfortable element of the initial data. The preliminary epidemiological assessment. It revealed a striking thematic pattern, a pattern regarding who was melting first.
Yes. The striking pattern is one of immediate, overwhelming class stratification. The initial cases and the first mass incidents were overwhelmingly reported among workers and poor people.
So this wasn't some random egalitarian plague.
Not in the beginning. The documentation suggests a very distinct socioeconomic profile defined the earliest, most widespread affliction. It appeared at first to target the foundational labor class of the entire global system.
Let's consider the specific examples of group liquefaction, because they tell the story of not just human loss, but the immediate, catastrophic collapse of industry.
The reports detail the complete deliquescence, the total dissolution of entire shifts in large factories.
The entire shift. At once.
At once, you have to picture the assembly line. An entire workforce transforms simultaneously into a mass of liquid. And the chilling, deeply unsettling consequence noted in the GMR is that the machinery was left running senselessly until breakdown.
Wow, so industry literally evaporated, leaving the physical processes of human production just operating autonomously until they failed.
It paints this picture of silence and sudden catastrophic abandonment. The machines kept going, but the minds driving them were gone, turned into fluid on the factory floor.
And this wasn't limited to urban manufacturing, was it? This spread.
No, it quickly moved through other vulnerable and marginalized sectors. We have documented incidents including mass breakouts from correctional facilities.
Because the prisoners liquefied.
Driven by sudden prisoner liquefaction, yes. The bars and walls became irrelevant. And Confirming the spread across rural poverty, small-scale flooding began to occur in rural farm villages as their inhabitants dissolved into the earth.
So the second flood didn't wait for rain.
It began with the liquefaction of the proletariat. It emerged from the very places where hard labor and systemic neglect overlapped.
This socioeconomic bias in the initial phase is such a critical point.
Yeah.
We need to carry this forward because the disease mechanism will later flip, but that initial vulnerability was so clearly defined by class.
Absolutely. The documents show that while the wealthy might have seen this as a distant, localized tragedy at first, a poor people's disease, the very nature of the liquid, defined by its bizarre properties, ensured that no one would remain safe for long.
Right, regardless of their social insulation.
That insulation was about to become meaningless.
Okay, so we have this new substance, the liquid people. It carries the sentience of the human body, or at least some form of it, but it operates under rules completely foreign to our understanding of the universe.
And this substance immediately plunged all scientific investigators, physicists, chemists, biologists, into utter chaos.
The document uses the phrase ludicrous confusion.
It does. And that's a massive institutional admission. You have the world's leading experts admitting that what they were encountering violated the very foundations of known reality. It defied every established principle of physics and hydrodynamics.
I mean, how does science even cope when the material it's studying decides to just ignore gravity and phase change stability?
Well, the short answer is it doesn't. The liquid presented not just a biological threat, but a direct refutation of classical mechanics.
Right.
Its very existence negated the predictability that underlies everything from architecture to engineering.
Let's break down these unique physical properties then, starting with movement. Because what is a liquid if it doesn't flow downhill?
This is perhaps the most immediate and horrifying deviation from the norm. The liquid was observed moving in direct contravention of the laws of hydrodynamics.
It wasn't inert.
Not at all. It was dynamic and purposeful. It was capable of crawling from lower to higher elevations, a fluid climbing a wall.
Which means any sense of refuge or containment built on the assumption that, gravity always wins was fundamentally useless from the start.
Completely useless. And the source material provides an extraordinarily vivid, almost stomach-churning analogy to help us visualize this movement.
I remember this part.
The liquid could scale vertical roadside fences, just like a snail gliding on its membrane.
It's such a terrifying image. It's quiet, it's deliberate, it's this non-human propulsion. You see a fence, you think safety, but this substance just adheres and crawls, completely ignoring the vertical barrier.
It makes a mockery of all our basic defenses.
Okay, let's move to the second major defiance. Its variable consistency. The dual states defined by this erratic surface tension. This wasn't a homogeneous substance.
No, it exhibited erratic variations in surface tension, almost as if it could choose its physical state based on its immediate needs. The documents outline two distinct contradictory states.
State 1 being the high-tension mobile form.
Yes, what they called the mercury-like state. It exhibited a very strong surface tension, which is what allowed it to retain an amorphous, almost amoeba-like shape, and crucially, to crawl. This is the state where it maintained its integrity as a threatening mass.
And then there's state 2, the truly insidious form, the alcohol-like state.
This state was defined by a weak surface tension, which granted it an extraordinary power of permeation vis-a-vis all solids.
So it could just seep through things.
Think of alcohol, how easily it spreads and infiltrates microscopic cracks. This meant the liquid people could seep through concrete, through minute hairline fractures and foundational structures, breaching any containment instantly.
So they didn't need to break the wall.
It just needed to temporarily change its surface tension to flow through the material structure of the wall itself.
So the liquid could be a cohesive, crawling mass one moment, and then an invasive, permeating fog the next. And this unpredictability extends to its chemistry as well.
Yes, the chemical mutability.
Yeah.
The chemical effects were entirely unpredictable and non-standard. The GHSC documented that in contact with the same type of paper, the liquid people could exhibit one of two outcomes.
Right.
It could be completely inert, just sitting there harmlessly, or it could chemically dissolve the paper. It was a substance whose chemical behavior was arbitrary, making any kind of predictive defense impossible.
And finally, phase change instability. We rely on temperature to define ice, water, and steam. This substance defied even thermodynamics.
Standard physics dictates that phase changes happen at standard temperatures relative to pressure. The liquid people, however, were capable of freezing and evaporating at various non-standard temperatures.
So the environment itself became a chaotic, unpredictable threat.
Exactly, because the liquid could decide whether it was going to freeze or evaporate, irrespective of the ambient heat or cold.
This instability led directly to immediate, documented lethal incidents. The reports are just filled with these sudden, impossible catastrophes.
They are. The reports cite specific ice incidents where normally stable frozen surfaces suddenly melted to swallow sleighs and skaters.
Without a change in the weather.
Without any change in weather or external thermal stimulus. A frozen pond, trusted as solid ground for centuries, could instantly revert to liquid and consume those upon it. The liquid was, in essence, operating on its own internal thermometer.
But the truly terrifying inversion of nature is the counterintuitive example, the summer freezing.
This is arguably the most psychologically destabilizing documented event. Swimming pools freezing abruptly in midsummer, sealing up swimmers.
In midsummer.
The heat of the day, the height of the summer season, offered absolutely no protection. The liquid people, perhaps in mass congregation, could choose to solidify, turning recreational areas into instant icy tombs. It was just mocking the human expectation of seasonal safety.
When you combine the ability to crawl uphill, permeate solids, change its chemical intent, and ignore temperature, you realize this isn't a fluid, it's a quantum threat disguised as water.
It is. And this protein substance naturally shattered the very foundations of human law and infrastructure. Starting with law enforcement, the entire concept of crime investigation just collapsed.
Well, how do you catch a culprit that can flow through locked doors and defying any kind of physical tracking?
You can't. The emergence of the liquid people led to a dramatic increase in what the reports termed perfect crimes. It posed a profound, immediate threat to law and order.
Physical evidence becomes meaningless.
Completely. Fingerprints dissolved, barrier defenses were bypassed. The rule of law requires predictable physical constraints, and the liquid people offered none.
And then we have the industrial failure, which hit the global economy at its most vital points. Steam power.
Absolutely critical. The admixture of liquid people with water supplies rendered steam engine boilers completely unusable. And you have to remember, steam power was the backbone of transport, factories, defense systems, everything.
The contamination was immediate and technically absolute.
It was. And we have to elaborate on the boiler paradox because this illustrates the substance's arbitrary destructive power. It didn't just cause one type of failure, it caused two diametrically opposed yet equally catastrophic outcomes.
Right, this is chilling because it removes any possibility of mitigating the threat.
It does. The failure manifested in one of two ways, chosen seemingly at random. The first outcome, a complete failure to build pressure.
So the engine just stops working.
It just ceased to function, inert, useless, total system failure. The second outcome, conversely, was violent, explosive expansion, destroying the machinery and everything around it instantly.
So it could be either a dud or a bomb.
And you had no way of knowing which it would be. The liquid people contaminated the very lifeblood of heavy industry, rendering it either catastrophically explosive or permanently inert. It stripped humanity of its centralized mechanical capacity almost overnight.
The lesson from this part of the documentation is that the liquid people weren't just a biological disaster. They were a systemic physical sabotage of the entire Newtonian world order.
They proved that the predictability of physics, the very tool humanity used to build its civilization, was conditional. And that condition had just been revoked.
So by October 18th, the world had entered what the documents call the bifurcated crisis. It's a new phase. While liquefaction is continuing its catastrophic acceleration among the labor class, a new, uniquely horrifying and asymmetrical threat emerges, and it's aimed at the wealthy elite. The dynamic shifts from physical dissolution to something more like psychological warfare.
This is a pivotal moment in the narrative of the collapse. As you said, liquefaction is accelerating among the working class, the poor people's disease. But a distinctly different yet equally lethal crisis engulfs the world's wealthy and high-status individuals.
They weren't physically melting, not yet.
No, but they were dying through psychological and subtle contamination.
This new manifestation was characterized by two utterly bizarre phenomena. Rapid, impossible drownings in minute quantities of liquid.
Right.
And the mass acquisition of a completely debilitating clinical hydrophobia. The rich were suddenly being hunted by the very elements inside their highly secured, exclusive homes.
We need to detail this effective drowning, as the reports call it. This death by impossible volumes. The reports document high-security residences, places explicitly designed to keep external threats out, experiencing this terrifying new vector of death.
Drowning in common household liquids.
Exactly. Let's run through the documented case studies because they really illustrate the absurdity and the horror of this shift. You mentioned the factory owner.
Yes, the factory owner and the coffee cup.
Case study 1 involved a factory owner, a symbol of that high-status industrial class. He drowned instantly in a cup of coffee immediately after putting his lips to the cup.
Instantly.
It wasn't poisoning. The autopsy, what they could do, confirmed it was drowning. An instantaneous systemic failure triggered by contact with a liquid that should have been harmless.
And the incident involving the industrialist and the whiskey glass is just as disturbing.
Case study 2. Another prominent industrialist met his end by drowning in a glass of whiskey. Again, these were controlled, measured volumes of liquid, yet they were acting with the lethal capacity of a deep ocean.
All the protection that wealth and security were supposed to offer just failed instantly.
It did. And then there's the extreme example, the one that circulated globally, demonstrating the complete breakdown of scale and safety.
The eyewash.
The eyewash. The extreme, widely cited example involved an individual reportedly drowning in a single drop of eyewash. A volume so infinitesimally small, meant for purification, became instantly fatal.
And these weren't just rumors.
No, these incidents were verified and circulated in high-level security reports, confirming the total unpredictability of death among the elite.
So what was the scientific consensus? What was the theoretical mechanism driving these impossible drownings?
Well, the theory centers on the ubiquitous spread and infiltration of the liquid people.
The idea that it had mixed with everything.
Everything. The liquid essence of the Deliquest people had mixed worldwide, with rivers crossing oceans, filtering through reservoirs, and falling as rain. The consensus was that any liquid, regardless of its original composition, coffee, whiskey, eyewash, was now suspected of containing this pervasive liquid essence.
Making it potentially contaminated and lethal.
Exactly. The second flood wasn't a single ocean lapping at the shores. It was a universal contamination of the entire global water supply.
And this realization that every single fluid on the planet was suspect, it triggered a massive psychological crisis among the surviving wealthy.
This psychological fallout was the pandemic of elite hydrophobia.
It was a debilitating state, a profound psychosomatic response to the presence of any water. The diagnosis confirms this was clinical hydrophobia in the true sense of the word.
They weren't just afraid. Their bodies were reacting as if water was a rabid predator.
And the distinction here is important. The report notes it was true hydrophobia, even when it wasn't accompanied by dysphagia, the difficulty swallowing that often comes with related conditions.
Right. It was a pure psychological and physiological rejection of water itself.
Global reports were documenting high-status individuals fainting at the mere sight of water.
Their wealth, their security, their attempts to distance themselves from the industrial melt, it was all negated by their own biology, which was just screaming, "This liquid is death!"
And medical science, again, failed utterly against this psychosomatic plague.
Utterly. Standard medical interventions, including the administration of anti-rabies vaccines used in traditional hydrophobia cases, proved completely useless.
It wasn't a pathogen they could fight.
No. The affliction was a reaction to existential contamination. It was a condition of the mind responding to the absolute physical betrayal of the planet's hydrosphere.
To understand the sheer depth of this psychological terror, we have to dissect the confession from a high government official. It was circulated internally as a core psychological case study.
Right.
This isn't just a man scared of water, it's a man whose entire reality is dissolved.
This confession is so vital because it reveals the internal narrative of that elite collapse. The official stated, I'm quoting here, "When I'm about to drink, I look at the water in the glass and already it does not seem like water to me."
The perception of the substance shifts before he even consumes it. He's recategorizing the water immediately, rejecting its elemental nature.
He goes on, "In short, it is a liquidized mineral, a harmful substance that is impossible to digest." He strips the water of its identity as an essential nutrient and replaces it with the idea of a toxic manufactured poison.
He's experiencing a rejection of reality itself. Water has become an unnatural industrial substance in his mind.
And his subjective prediction about what would happen if he drank it. It reveals the immediate connection to the effective drowning phenomena.
His fear is instantly projected into his future.
He says, if I took a mouthful, I am positive I would immediately get sick. I'm instantly invaded by tragic fears. The mere act of preparing to drink triggers the expectation of death. His mind is already executing the effective drowning for him.
And the tragic, profound irony here is the thematic link. The wealthy, who initially sought to insulate themselves from the poor people's disease, the liquefaction, they're now facing a liquid contamination defined by essence, not by volume. The liquid essence of the deliquesced poor has literally contaminated their most secure environments and turned the very act of thirst into a lethal gamble.
The flood had breached their walls and their high ground, not through force, but through infiltration and psychological contamination. It proved that when existence itself becomes fluid, class boundaries offer no protection at all.
So as this dual crisis escalated, liquefaction below, hydrophobia above governments and the media struggled to reconcile this impossible reality with any kind of conventional crisis management.
Right.
This period, from October 18th to the 25th, it's defined by denial giving way to doomed action.
The documentation points to what it calls an invisible chorus of voices worldwide, all proclaiming imminent doom by a great flood. These were the decentralized reports, the witnesses, the observers, like that first philosopher. Their warnings were coalescing into a kind of global awareness.
But the major media outlets immediately acted to suppress this panic. They engaged in strenuous denial, using a set of technically true but utterly misleading facts.
They attempted to use classical meteorological data to argue against the existence of a non-classical flood. They cited repeatedly that rainfall was below the annual average.
The numbers looked fine.
The numbers looked fine. River levels had not exceeded seasonal norms, and no meteorological or geological abnormalities were observed. Their argument was essentially, the metrics say it's not flooding, so therefore it isn't.
Which created this immediate severe reality gap. The official facts were contradicting the observable reality, people melting, strange liquid masses crawling up hills.
It resulted in severe social unrest. The reports highlight that the population could literally watch the flood start in these non-standard ways, defying what they were being told on their television screens.
This non-standard nature of the flood, the fact that it ignored rain gauges and tide charts, allowed the denial to persist even as society was dissolving.
It was intellectual gaslighting on a planetary scale.
Eventually, though, the physical reality became so overwhelming that the denial became an unsustainable lie. What was the tipping point for official acknowledgement?
The sheer scale of the inundation. The moment the liquid people engulfed numerous villages and towns, submerging flatlands and even low hills, the visual evidence became too vast to categorize as just a localized anomaly.
And this led to immediate catastrophic panic among those who still believed that high ground offered some kind of safety.
The documents describe a competitive stampede for refuge. High-status, wealthy populations, fearing both liquefaction and contamination, desperately sought safety in upland and mountain districts.
They were relying on ancient, traditional Newtonian knowledge about flood defense. Go uphill.
Go uphill! But the expert assessment reminds us that this refuge was instantly futile.
Utterly futile. The GCMC reports point out that this liquid was capable of climbing walls and hillsides. The difference in elevation meant nothing to a fluid that defied gravity. Their last remaining conventional defense altitude was rendered useless by the quantum dynamics of the threat.
The panic forced world leaders to finally speak.
Presidents and prime ministers finally admitted the gravity of the situation, and this led to the great proclamation of collective material action.
The defense strategy was simple, massive, and entirely physical: dams and dikes.
Proclamations were issued declaring that saving humanity required mobilizing, and this is the quote, all spiritual and material resources to expedite the building of great dams and dikes.
They reverted to the largest, simplest, most tangible form of human defense against water. They were just trying to build a bigger wall.
And what was the societal cost of this immediate, desperate action?
Tens of thousands of workers were rounded up immediately for compulsory labor to execute this plan. It was a mass mobilization of the remaining labor force against this rising tide.
And the media, having previously denied the flood ever existed, performed a total reversal, supporting the new official narrative.
The media performed an abrupt, nauseating shift. They abandoned their previous denials and started praising the proclamations for their high morality and sense of public duty. The message was now, the flood is real, but we can beat it with grit and concrete.
But behind all the morale boosting, The Joint Crisis Management Commission, the JCMC, delivered the confidential, chilling reality check.
Yes, the JCMC report unequivocally categorized the massive construction proclamations as futile measures. They understood the fundamental disconnect between the threat and the response.
And they provided the definitive, powerful analogy that captures the scientific impotence of humanity in that moment.
The specific expert analogy was that standard flood defenses, dikes, and dams were no more than Newtonian dynamics against quantum dynamics.
It's a scientific articulation of why building a bigger wall wouldn't stop a substance that could crawl through concrete, permeate solids, and choose its own state of matter.
The walls were universally understood internally to be completely ineffectual from the moment they were proposed.
And the tragedy was amplified by the fact that the defense strategy was instantly, self-defeatingly compromised by the very nature of the flood itself.
This is the darkest irony of the collapse. The specific immediate failure was this. Workers constructing the dikes are rapidly turning into liquid on this side of the dikes.
So the compulsory labor system was feeding the enemy it was trying to contain.
Exactly. The effort to save the species was simultaneously liquidating the remaining labor pool, making the flood larger and the workforce smaller with every passing hour.
With the defense collapsing and the reality of the threat defying all efforts, the government's focus shifted entirely to maintaining the psychological illusion of control, and this required aggressive censorship.
The primary goal was social order. To achieve this, media newspapers, specifically, were directed to maintain resolute silence regarding the contradictory nature and the essential cause of the flood.
Liquefaction itself could not be named.
No, the public could not know the true mechanism of the catastrophe.
And yet, the evidence of the true cause was flooding the personal sections of the newspapers, this indirect proof of mass dissolution.
Right. Notices of missing persons were flooding the personal items pages. It was a massive, unstated reflection of the liquefaction rate.
And the directive was stringent about how to treat these.
It was. These notices had to be treated solely as effects of the flood, people swept away by water, not as evidence of the underlying cause, which was people dissolving into water.
They maintained the lie of the standard flood until the very end, sacrificing truth for a momentary semblance of social stability.
The state was actively trying to manage reality, long after reality itself had become completely unmanageable.
By October 25th, the dike strategy had clearly, catastrophically failed, crippled by the self-liquefaction of the workforce. So science was called upon for one final, desperate, large-scale technological solution.
This was the ultimate Hail Mary pass of global science, relying on the highest form of human energy.
The nuclear option. What was the plan?
A scientific proposal was introduced to volatilize the liquid covering the Earth by means of nuclear energy. The hope was to transform the sentient, chaotic liquid into a harmless, gaseous state, essentially to reverse the flood by force of atomic power.
Given the desperation, the governmental response was immediate and enthusiastic.
Oh, absolutely. Governments quickly indicated approval and pledged full assistance. They recognized this as the last major hope. The idea of brute force solving this physics problem was psychologically very attractive.
But the JCMC assessment delivered the ultimate technical fatality. Despite the governmental enthusiasm and commitment, the project was immediately deemed impossible.
The veto was based on a comprehensive analysis of logistics versus the accelerating rate of catastrophe, specifically the problem of geometrical progression.
And this is where the collapse shifts from a linear decline to an exponential disaster.
That's right.
So what exactly did the geometrical progression of liquefaction mean for the nuclear project?
It meant the rate of liquefaction was increasing exponentially. The amount of liquid generated daily was increasing, but simultaneously the remaining workforce was decreasing exponentially. There were instantly insufficient workers for adequate replacements across all the industrial and technical sectors needed for nuclear implementation.
The human resource pool was collapsing faster than new infrastructure could be built.
Exactly, and the expertise required for this high-level project was evaporating at the same rate as the general population.
Right, because liquefaction was now occurring among the scientists themselves.
The intellectual capital, the physicists, engineers, and nuclear specialists required to design and manage the volatilization process, they were dissolving into the rising tide. The solution was dissolving its own means of construction.
And the physical infrastructure was failing geometrically as well.
The necessary parts factories, the specialized facilities required to manufacture the complex components for nuclear equipment, were steadily being destroyed and engulfed by the waters. Factories were either melting their staff or being infiltrated and flooded by the liquid people.
So the overwhelming combination of personnel loss, intellectual capital loss, and physical destruction. It meant the time required to build the necessary machinery simply surpassed the time remaining before extinction.
Due to overwhelming problems of reorganization and reconstruction, the production timeline for vital nuclear equipment could not be predicted. The logistical failure was absolute. The nuclear volatilization project was vetoed.
And this date, October 25th, it really marks the definitive end of hope based on human technological intervention.
Human ingenuity collapsed not because the science was wrong, but because the labor required to implement the science had literally melted away.
We reach October 30th. This is the final phase, where the GMR records the terminal stages of the remaining non-liquefied human population.
And in the wake of the failed dikes and the abandoned nuclear plant, the entire surviving population was left completely exposed.
So what was the final devastating physiological threat that emerged?
The non-liquefied human population was now suffering from a severe and widespread crisis of dehydration.
The irony is just agonizing. Surrounded by a planet covered in fluid, they were dying of thirst.
The crisis documents note that the scale of this desiccation was catastrophic. The physical transformation was rapid, suggesting some active or systemic interference by the omnipresent liquid people.
People were rapidly turning into mummies.
That's the description. And this physiological collapse was so severe that the suffering became audible. It's a documented feature of the extinction phase.
What was the specific auditory detail documented in the reports? It's horrifying.
Individuals emitted gasping, rattling noises each time they breathed. It's a terrifying, high-fidelity detail of internal failure. It's the sound of the body losing its water and desiccating rapidly.
And this strongly suggests a rapidly accelerating physiological collapse.
It does. It's potentially linked to the pervasive and active nature of the liquid people, which may have been interfering with the global hydrological cycle and, crucially, human biological water retention mechanisms.
So the theory implies the liquid people weren't just taking up space. They were actively disrupting the fundamental ability of life to retain water, leading to this final, desperate, internal drought.
Amidst this total global physiological distress, the document records one singular, haunting anomaly, the individual known as Noah. He represents the last gasp of ancient religious and narrative hope.
While the world was mummifying and rattling, Noah was described in stark contrast.
Amidst the global panic, only one person was reported as calm and happy, Noah. He was described as optimistic and wily, and he was diligently working on constructing an ark, relying on the blueprints of ancient scripture.
And his motivation was explicitly religious, tied to a sense of historical repetition.
Yes, his actions were rooted in a profound sense of religious exaltation. He claimed prior experience with the previous flood, believing the future of the human race was to be entrusted solely to him and his family.
The historical reference suggests a deep psychological need for this individual, facing an incomprehensible modern disaster, to fit the crisis into an ancient, solvable narrative framework.
He was clinging to the idea that this flood, too, could be solved by a big wooden boat, despite all the evidence that this water could climb fences.
Which brings us to the Ark incident. This is the definitive narrative climax of human extinction in the reports. It is the moment the new reality definitively rejected the old salvation narrative.
Yes. When the liquid approached Noah's house, he, his family, and domestic animals boarded the ark. The final attempt at conventional salvation commenced.
The failure was instantaneous and absolute.
Immediately, the liquid people began to crawl up the sides of the boat. The quantum liquid was completely unaffected by the buoyancy or the height of the human construction.
And Noah's response, the verbal repulsion, is arguably the most poignant detail in the entire GMR report. He attempted to repel a liquid using purely human concepts: identity, ownership, language.
He asserted his authority, shouting, and this is a direct quote, "Hey, whose boat do you think this is? I am Noah. This is Noah's Ark. Make no mistake about it. Go on, get out of here."
He was appealing to property rights and personal identity, the cornerstones of human law and society.
And this verbal intervention was based on the fatal miscalculation that the liquid retained any capacity for human comprehension or respect for human systems.
The document is explicit about this.
It explicitly states the central, tragic truth. The liquid was no longer human and therefore incapable of understanding his words. The liquid people had transcended the bounds of biology and, crucially, sociology. Noah's reliance on human law was meaningless.
For the liquid, the concepts of ownership and identity were completely obsolete.
Exactly. For the liquid, the report says there are only concerns of liquid. Its existence was defined purely by fluid dynamics, physics, and mass devoid of human empathy, property rights, or the capacity for communication. It acted purely on liquid necessity.
And the conclusion is sudden, brutal, and utterly final.
In the next minute, the ark filled up with the liquid, and all living creatures aboard drowned. The last symbol of religious salvation, built on ancient wisdom, was overcome instantly by the non-human reality of the second flood.
The documents then record the final image of human endeavor.
The derelict ark was left to drift at the mercy of the wind, an empty wooden shell floating aimlessly on a sea of sentient dissolution, marking the end of the human epoch.
Which leads us to the final, devastating determination in the Global Monitoring Report regarding the state of life on Earth.
The document concludes that humanity has perished in the second flood. The timeline of human civilization, as observed and documented by its own crisis bodies, officially ends with the drowning of Noah.
The documentation doesn't cease with the extinction of humanity, though. It provides a coda, a final, strange geological observation on the state of the planet now ruled by this sentient fluid.
That's right. Geophysical surveys were conducted on the now peaceful waters following the extinction event. The violent chaos of liquefaction and the turbulence of the initial flood had subsided, replaced by a strange, still inundation covering the globe.
And the surveys reported an utterly peculiar post-human sight. A glittering substance had begun to crystallize.
And this crystallization was not random. It was occurring specifically at defined, observable locations that marked the sites of former human congregation.
Where specifically?
At street corners and under the trees of submerged villages. The liquid was solidifying into a new, inorganic geology, patterned by the ghost of human settlement.
What is the final, chilling theoretical implication of this crystallization? What did they think this was?
This substance is theorized to be forming around the invisible core of the supersaturated liquid people.
So it's the liquid itself changing form again.
The theory suggests the massive volume of liquid people may be entering a new, final, solid state. This ultimate transformation closes the cycle of the catastrophe. From biological life to chaotic sentient liquid, and finally to a glittering inorganic mineral form. A silent, physical testament to the species that was.
This shift from sentient fluid to structured, glittering solid is the final, non-human phase of the disaster.
The Earth has absorbed and transformed its inhabitants, processing the remains of humanity into a material that follows the precise laws of physics that the sentient fluid initially rejected.
So, we have completed the exhaustive narrative of the second flood. From that initial isolated worker melting observed by the philosopher to the global glittering crystallization of this final sentient mineral.
We meticulously tracked the socioeconomic bias at the initial liquefaction, the scientific incomprehension that faced a liquid defying gravity, and the psychological warfare waged against the elite through hydrophobia and effective drowning.
We documented the doomed human reaction. The utter futility of the government's Newtonian defenses, dams, and dikes, constructed by the very workers who were melting into the flood. And the final logistical collapse of the nuclear solution, vetoed by the geometrical progression of extinction.
And the most profound failure wasn't technological or logistical, but philosophical. As highlighted by the Ark incident, Noah's reliance on human law, on identity, on language, was instantly negated by a liquid that was no longer human.
A liquid concerned only with the physics and needs of liquid existence.
Right.
So after detailing this definitive extinction event, what remains of human legacy? The tragedy wasn't just the physical drowning, but the total rendering obsolete of human science, law, and our narrative structures.
Indeed. The liquid, by being no longer human, reduced existence to only concerns of liquid. Our complex civilization, our infrastructure, our social constructs, our spiritual certainties were rendered entirely meaningless by a substance that operated on principles of quantum chaos, not human order.
The transformation of life into liquid and then liquid back into a solid is the final irony.
It is, and it leaves us with this final thought. Considering the final state of crystallization, this transformation of sentient liquid back into a glittering, solid mineral found only at the places where human life concentrated, like former street corners, What does this ultimate non-human phase imply about the nature of consciousness and existence after biological death?
That's a deep question.
And what material legacy does a liquidized species ultimately leave behind on the geology of the planet?
A glittering, crystallized mineral, mapping the silent ruins of our cities. An astonishing and terrifying geological coda to the story of humanity. Thank you for joining us on this exhaustive deep dive into the documents detailing the Second Flood.
Thank you.
We invite you to continue exploring the deep connections and specific details of this extraordinary definitive event.